Hello, and welcome back to Spy Hard's podcast. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur.
We're here continuing our celebration of the festive season by taking a look at 1989's The Package. And Cam, we have a very special guest joining us today.
Yes, director Andrew Davis, who has helmed such films as Under Siege, The Fugitive, Above the Law, and also 1989's The Package, which we talked about this week with the guys from Spotlight. Had a lot of fun talking about that movie.
Yeah, absolutely. The guy is responsible for some of your favorite 80s and 90s films. So I think without further ado, let's take it to the man himself, Andrew Davis. Cam, roll that interview. And joining us on the show now, the director of this week's film, The Package. You may know him from such films as The Fugitive, Under Siege, Above the Law, Holds. It is none other than Mr. Andrew Davis. Hello, sir. How are you doing?
Glad to be with you. Thank you, Scott.
It's an absolute honor to have you on the show. I've been doing a bit of a deep dive on your back catalogue recently. I've definitely been enjoying these Seagal films, but we are here to talk about this week's film, The Package. So I guess the first question to open this up, how did you get connected with the film?
Well, let's see. I think what happened was I did Above the Law, and it was a success. And Orion Pictures knew of me from Code of Silence. I had done a picture for them. So Mike Medavoy recommended I be the director of this picture with Gene Hackman. And I was very, very flattered and excited to be working with one of the greatest actors that we had at that time. And the story was originally all set in Camp David. It had a very narrow window of what was possible visually with it. And I thought it should be definitely set in a city and in an urban environment. So, of course, Chicago was my home, and I worked there before. And so I convinced them to do that. But what really happened was I was able to integrate the whole history of the Kennedy assassination and the Patsy and Oswald and I had done a lot of research into that, and understood all the strange amalgam of people who were interested in being part of that assassination and who may have been a part of it. And so we wove that together to become the fabric of the Package conspiracy.
And a lot of your movies deal with conspiracies, whether it's, The Fugitive even has kind of a conspiracy at the core of it. With this movie, is that like an interest of you to kind of bring that to your work? Something that adds for you, like, because a lot of these movies are more action-based. Does that kind of open up the world for you, delving into like these conspiracies?
It's exactly right. I think that, I was a journalism major in the late 60s at University of Illinois. And, I was frustrated because we were being asked to repeat lies that State Department were putting out about what was going on, the status of the war. And so I think that I was always interested, I don't call them conspiracies, but basically what's really happening behind the scenes. Who's really behind these policies and these issues, and how does that affect reality? How does it affect our lives? So, this is a very relevant story. I mean, in terms of the issue of atomic weapons, nuclear weapons, it couldn't be more timely today. And as a matter of fact, I've just finished a novel that deals with a similar theme about, a terrible accident that takes place in the world with some weapons that are being tested by the Russians, and a bunch of people die, and now they want to have a peace conference. And it's the same thing. The generals don't really want to give up their weapons, and they go through the motions and acting like they want to have détente. And it was much healthier than with Gorbachev and Bush and post-Reagan. But today it would be near impossible to get Mr. Putin to give up his weapons. So the point is that in terms of conspiracies and storytelling, the Fugitive dealt with a drug protocol that said that this company was not going to make billions of dollars on a drug. And they had to shut this doctor up. They had to make him a murderer to get past his understanding what the dangers of this drug were. So yes, there are things like Above the Law dealt with the Central American policies of what we were doing. And, anyway, so yes, I do like to take relevant topical things and weave them into stories. And the basis of the commerciality of sometimes it's if you're dealing with scholar or something like that, there's action involved, but you can also be very political.
I always appreciated that, when these movies were coming out, I remember they would be often talked about as thinking person's action movies, and that they delivered the thrills that definitely got audiences into the theater, but there would be that extra material to dig into. And it's something that I think is often lost a little bit nowadays. I really enjoyed these movies back in, the 90s and 80s.
Wow. Well, you were younger and more optimistic.
That's true. That's true. I'm broken now.
Well, I think it's possible to make a relevant movie today, but if it doesn't have Marvel characters and green screen, I don't know. That's not so easy to make. Really, there are some. Of course, there have been some very relevant movies made about a lot of issues in the last 10 years. But I hope that we can get back to telling stories that are connected to the news, but not necessarily embedded with what has to be happening that day, because it takes a year or so to make a movie. Mm-hmm. How do you keep up with the themes of what's going on? I'm sure there'll be lots of movies with Trumpian type characters in them in the future.
Oh, definitely.
Well, one of the things we noted when we were talking about the film earlier this week is just how great Gene Hackman is in this film. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about with the casting. Obviously, you were brought on board for the film. Was Gene already cast at this point, or did you go through casting with him and Tommy Lee and all those lot?
No, Gene was already cast. Gene was part of the package, and Tommy. This first time I worked with Tommy, and since I've done 2 other films with him, and he was somebody that I had seen in a film called Backroads. He played a fighter. And I always just thought he had a real reality and toughness to him. And I've told the story before, but when I met him, when he came to Chicago after he was cast and he'd agreed to take the part, we connected because it turns out I grew up on the south side of Chicago in a Serbo-Croatian, Black, Mexican, a very mixed neighborhood. And the quarterback of my high school football team was a guy named George Lalich, who was the quarterback for Tommy at Harvard.
Right.
They had played together in the same team. And in fact, that Lalich's father was a bit of a gangster. Sorry, George, who was betting against his own son's team against Yale. There's a famous movie about Yale and Harvard. Anyway, so that's how Tommy got cast. But Gene was already on board, and then John Hurd we cast, and Joanna Cassidy and Dennis Franz I had worked with on my first movie, Stony Island, before he was known at all. And it was just looking at the cast, it's an amazing cast, and I was very, very blessed to have Hackman. Hackman was tough. I was this young director, didn't know how to sort of handle talent in a certain way, and I learned to sort of step back and let him find his own thing. You don't tell Gene Hackman how to hold the apple, and not that I have in the future. But it was a really great experience for me, and I think one of the best reviews I got after the film came out. I was in LA. It was after some awards thing, and I bumped into Tom Hanks, who I didn't really know very well. He says, "Man, I really liked the package. It was a really great movie." And if you'll notice, Spielberg used that same Gleinacher Bridge that they come over from Berlin in that film they did. What was the film they made together?
Bridge of Spies.
Bridge of Spies. It was the same exact setup coming over the bridge. We shot it in Chicago, on the Chicago Avenue. But anyway, I felt that I knew that he was aware of that bridge for sure.
Well, you bring up Chicago, and obviously you were, born in Chicago, and you've shot several movies there. I'm just curious, what is it about Chicago as like a cinematic place? Because I think, moviegoers have a relationship with, New York or Paris or places like that in movies, but there's been a lot of work done in Chicago. What is it about that city that really pops on screen?
Well, architecturally, it's amazing. The city burnt down in the late 1800s and was rebuilt. And they had some of the most creative, visionary architects who were coming out of there. Louis Sullivan, Frank Lloyd Wright, all kinds of different people. And they made a plan. They took the rubble of the city and pushed it out into the lake. So they built this beautiful lakefront with all kinds of museums and parks and a place where everybody, poor or rich, could go and enjoy the lake. So that's one thing. The reality was there were not very many movies made. The film business started in Chicago, actually. There's a studio called SNA where Charlie Chaplin worked. And then they later, a lot of the studio heads came out of the theaters in Chicago. Some of the guys from Universal and stuff like that, they were all running theaters in Chicago. But Chicago didn't have very many movies made because during Mayor Daley's routine, you couldn't fire a gun and have a movie in Chicago. He was so afraid of the gangster image of Al Capone. You know, if you go to Europe, I was a kid going to Europe from Chicago, they go, oh, Al Capone, you know, da, 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 da. And I think that it's funny because Daley's funeral was in my first movie called Stony Island, a film about young musicians in Chicago. And so then years later, I was able to put the St. Patrick's Day parade, which I wanted to shoot with Daley. I couldn't do it. He died in The Fugitive.
Right.
And so that was somebody, but I think, you know, I don't take total credit for it, but I think The Fugitive really opened up Chicago. I know it did, because the studios realized you could make a world-class movie with a local crew and a lot of local talent. And after that, you know, I can tell you from the people who called me, the Batman got made there. Shia LaBeouf worked on what's the robot movie he did? The Transformers was done there.
Yeah.
You know, and lots of movies. And now Dick Wolf has taken it over to doing his CSI stuff. And that's what is it? Chicago Law and Chicago Fire and Chicago whatever, you know.
PD, I think, is the other one.
Yeah. So anyway, it's become a major place to have a good crew, have great cooperation, and have access to everything you'd get in New York and LA.
Now, sort of casting your mind back to the shooting of the film, back in shooting in Chicago, is there any particular memories you have of on set, any sort of obstacles you overcame when you were shooting it, anything like that?
Well, one of the obstacles was we shot in the opening that takes place in Berlin. We shot the whole movie in Chicago except for a little bit in Berlin. We did go to Berlin, but it was snowing, and we had to come back to do some other stuff, and we didn't have any snow. So we had to make snow, and finally it snowed again. You know, so that was one of the issues, the continuity with some snow. It was raining the night we were shooting on the bridge, and there was a question about whether the gaffer was going to feel comfortable with keeping the lights on with the rain and the electricity and electrocuting people, those kind of things. Let's see what else. I think that was basically it. You know, there was I think that we didn't have any real production problems. It was cold, and but everybody was bundled up, and you know, it gave the film a lot of texture to have all that cold weather.
It's something I actually noted was I've never seen people look so cold in a film before. So you definitely captured the essence of Christmas time.
Well, watch Chain Reaction; they're even colder.
Fair enough.
It was so cold one night in Chain Reaction. The fire department pulled their people, and they said, we can't work in these conditions. So I said to the crew, okay, we can finish and not have to come back, or we can go home and have to come back. And I said, who wants to stay? And nobody raised their hands.
Fair. Well, I also mentioned Christmas there because it's kind of there's a underlying theme with Christmas in this film. Obviously, it's set at Christmas time. Was that something that came from the script, or was it something that you added in, suggested, something to sort of paint the picture of the world?
Well, it had to do with peace.
The
Prince of Peace, and then thematically about getting along and the joyous world. And I don't remember exactly the dates we were there, but I'm sure we were there close to Christmas, or preparing it at least. So it was a way of decorating that L station where Tommy Lee shoots from, with all of those hidden things. How terrible to have a hat and assassin hidden behind Santa Claus,
One aspect of your films I find very effective when I look at whether it's, The Fugitive or The Package is that a lot of them deal with characters being hunted, and whether it's Gene Hackman being hunted, throughout the movie, but also pursuing Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think is very effective is that whenever I see, your movies and that deal with this, the person doing the hunting is as smart as the person who's pursuing them. And that it really helps elevate the tension. I would love to know just from you in terms of casting and then directing these movies about creating a dynamic between the two figures and making that really work and building up tension on screen.
Well, the bad guy is always the most interesting character.
Mm-hmm.
It's your hero who you have empathy for and you're cheering for, but it's the bad guy you're scared about, or you're interested. Why is he doing this, or what's he going to do next? Right. I remember meeting with some kind of a strange producer once. He may have been British, actually.
Instantly strange.
Who wasn't? He was a financier. Right? He said, the most successful movies are all about chases, chase and escape, chase and escape. And so if you go back and look over a lot of movies, it's sort of that case. I don't know. I suppose if you've done something right or something wrong and somebody wants to stop you or prevent you, that's what's going to happen. You're going to be in danger and on the run.
And you frequently, Gene Hackman, Tommy Lee Jones, like these are very accomplished actors, and that continues through much of your work. And what do they bring to that type of storytelling that really seems to work in its favor?
Everything.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you look back at these things and how did we do this? Who wrote those words? How did it get to be so real? And, because you're so invested in it when you're doing it and everything sort of makes sense and tied together. You step back and look at it again, you go, there was a lot of work to be done to create that, Hackman was, he's just a powerhouse. He was fantastic to have. And Tommy and everybody, Joanna and Hurd, I worked with him again on The Guardian. Unfortunately, he died young. But John Hurd was really good in that movie. I love that scene where at the end of the movie where Hackman and Hurd have this confrontation. It's just, we haven't had a war in 50 years because of our nuclear weapons. And, he talks about a nut and nutcase, and I'd rather be in Washington rather than Russia fighting the Russians. It was very powerful. But anyway, Hackman, actors are everything. If you don't have the right actors there, it's not going to work. Now, I've worked with some non-actors and had to make them into characters that you cared about and loved them. But like in Under Siege, Tommy Lee's in the movie more than Seagal.
Mm-hmm.
There's more of that, And in Code of Silence, you've got Dennis Farina, who was still a cop at the time in that movie.
Right.
And Henry Silva, who just died, was in that movie. So you've got all these different kinds of people that have to support them and give them morality if they're not great actors.
And I came across an interview with you talking about your work, and one thing I thought was really interesting, we were talking about some of your collaborations with Tommy Lee Jones, and I believe The Package was also referenced in that conversation, about just him kind of improving and how he had very strong instincts for helping, in a case like The Fugitive, where there was, no script issues along the way, and improvising and coming up with some ideas. And that's something I don't hear talked about a lot with Tommy Lee Jones. I would just love to know from you, working with him, sort of his instincts for that sort of thing. Well,
he's a major talent as a director and a writer and as an actor, and you're stupid not to try to take advantage of whatever somebody has to offer. You come there with on The Fugitive, the script was not in great shape, and we were literally writing it every day on the set. I knew what I had to accomplish each day, but the details and the words and all this stuff. So that comes out of the reality of having these actors who are playing. Joey Pantoliano was critical to that dynamic, helping Tommy play off each other. I don't remember a lot of improvisation on The Package. I do remember that Gene, it was funny, Gene was going through the script, said, we don't need this line and we don't need this line. He was trying to cut some lines, and Tommy got upset because he was cutting some of Tommy's lines. And he went to the producer. He says, he's fucking with my kids. He's taking my lines away. You can't do that, you know. And it wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty, but it turned out great anyway.
Well, you mentioned off air before we hit record that you'd sort of gone back through the package a little bit on a Blu-ray today, and just something I was curious about. What's your favorite sequence from the film?
You know, I think besides the great acting and the content of what they say and how they relate to each other, I'm really happy with the scope of the movie. The idea of this the beginning, the peace conference in Berlin, where they're planning on the gathering, and you've got all these people together, the generals and Russians and Americans talking together and conspiring, and then the scale of the motorcades coming into the city and the buildup of this big event. I thought that was pretty neat. I like the scale and the scope of the images that set the importance of this event in place.
It's definitely very different from the concept of just having it at Camp David. It's a much wider scope there, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, it was sort of replacing Dallas in the sense of the assassination. You know, looking down and hidden away in some kind of building, looking down on things. You know, well, one of the scenes that's my most favorite is the scene on the plane between Tommy Lee and Gene. You know, he says, "What, you read a book?" He says, "You don't know where I'm going." You know. So I thought that was great, and that was, they both at the top of their game there, you know.
And I would love to know just about your action direction in this movie, and you would, you know, develop skills going forward with things like, you know, The Fugitive. But one of the things I really appreciate in your work is that you can make the action feel chaotic and alive, but at the same time, there's a humanity to all of the action scenes. And I would love to know just your approach to action, because it really does, and did at the time, stand out from a lot of the other people doing action, in film.
Well, the word action is funny. Because what is action? It's fighting, running, shooting, jumping, chasing. You know, that's sort of what action is. And I think that the rule is keep it real, keep it human. Make it feel like you're there as part of it. You know, today with the digital world and slowing of the speeds of the camera and being able to do anything you want to do, you know, you see these chases and you go, my God, how did they do that? I don't know. You know, it's quite amazing. But when it's real, it really gets you. I saw something the other day. The movie. One of the movies is up for best film from Colombia. Best foreign film from Colombia. There's a sequence where these kids, these gaminas, are jumping on the back of a truck, and two kids are on a bike with lanyards hooked onto the back of this truck, and they're going down these mountain roads like this on their bikes. It's the scariest thing I've ever seen because it's real. And there's nothing fabricated. And I think that's the difference. Today, people know that it's all digital. They know it's not really real. I mean, that the train crash in The Fugitive was 99% real, and that you feel it. You feel it, and you know, there was a few visual effect shots. So anyway, the rule of thumb would be keep it as honest and real as you can, and don't go overboard with close-ups and little inserts and things like that.
Like there's the sequence where there's the two hikers that leads to, you know, the car accident and like the shootout, and what I love about it is it's very messy, intentionally so. Like it feels like something you're actually, you know, watching that could be happening. And that's something that I think, as you said, you know, sometimes inserts or when they start doing overly showy camera work, it can kind of take away from the reality of it. But like sequences like that in the package and in a lot of your work, I just am consistently impressed by.
Well, thank you. What about holes?
Holes too? Yeah.
Yeah, those lizards, you know.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, opening up sort of the floor now, with the package, but your wider filmography. You know, you spoke about working with Gene Hackman, obviously established career definitely by that point. But Steven Seagal, his first film, Above the Law, and you go on to work with him again in Under Siege. We had this question from a couple of our listeners, but what was it like to work with Steven? Well,
on Above the Law, it was easy because his ego hadn't gone crazy, you know, at that point. And we agreed politically. There was during Iran-Contra, and we agreed politically about what was going on. And there were some very scary characters that he brought onto the set later in Under Siege that were part. There was a fabric of political conspiracy and CIA stuff and things like that he was really interested in doing. I don't know what was really. When I did Above the Law, I was handed a different script, and they said, we'd like you to look at the script. And I said, well, maybe John Boyd could play this part. He said, well, we want you to meet this guy, Steven Seagal. I said, who's Steven Seagal? Well, he's Michael Ovitz's karate teacher. Michael Ovitz was the biggest agent in Hollywood at the time. So I met him, and he said, I picked you. I saw Code of Silence, and I think that you should direct my movie. They're going to try to make me an actor star. I said, well, we got to do a screen test. So we went to Chicago, and I shot a screen test with him. And Kelly LeBrock, who was his girlfriend at the time, and came back and in the studio said, wow, this is really great. They liked what I'd shot. I said, I think you're making the wrong movie with this guy. I said, whether it's true or not, he's got these stories about going over to Asia and Japan and he being undercover with the CIA. And I said, I want to do a movie that's based upon what he says his life is about, or some of these themes, and wrap it around this Iran-Contra conspiracy, what's going on. And they said, how long will it take? And there was going to be a writer's strike. And I said 5 weeks. And we wrote that script. I've got Ron Shusett, who wrote Alien, and Stephen Pressfield, who later wrote some very great novels and stuff. And we worked it out, and we knocked it out. And so he was easy to work with in those days. And then by the time we did Under Siege, he had done several other movies. Some of had done so. And I met Peter McGregor Scott, who had been working with him as a producer, and we became very close partners and wound up doing 6 movies together, including The Fugitive. And, he was a pain in the butt, to get him to smile, and he did fine. I mean, the movie works with him, and it's believable, and he made his own contributions to the action or the technology. But, it was like, it wasn't as much fun as Above the Law.
Right.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Calling all agents. Independent podcasting, much like the spy game, requires considerable resources, whether it's research, equipment, hosting, or of course constructing a top secret volcano lair. We're putting out the call for your support.
That's right. As you may know, we've activated the Spy Hearts Patreon, home of our ever-growing lineup of Agents in the Field episodes where we decode non-spy films from your favorite spy actors and full film commentaries with more intel than a Basil exposition briefing.
Cam, what have we got in our crosshairs this month?
The Long Kiss Goodnight commentary is live, and there's more holiday fun. We're getting a little romantic this season because we're looking at the 2003 romantic comedy, Love Actually.
And if that sounds delicious, then become a true spy hard today and join the circus at patreon.com/spyhards. But before this message self-destructs, Cam, resume the spy jinx.
Now, to me, Under Siege always really just shone because of Tommy Lee Jones and Gary Busey as your villains. And just the energy they bring to every scene. And I think it's a really strong contrast between sort of this stoic hero, the Seagal type, which you work with a lot of, it seems, stoic heroes in your work. But I would love to know just about working with these kind of larger-than-life villains and getting those performances across.
Well, that was a ball. We had a great time making Under Siege, because we were all down in Alabama. We found a battleship that was close enough to the Missouri that we could use the guts of. And we built inside the sets inside of a hangar that was nearby in Fairhope, Alabama. But Busey was wonderful. I mean, I gave him the book from the ship, the Missouri's book, the history. And he's, oh, Andy, I got to dress up. I got to dress up like a woman. I got to do this thing in drag. I said, okay. And the studio went, oh my God, shoot it both ways. Well, we never even thought about it because it was so funny. for him to do what he did. And Tommy's character was originally sort of Elton Johnish, a little more fey. And I said, better be Paul Butterfield or Stevie Ray Vaughan, And so he and my brother's band was there when we recorded some of the stuff, the music that he was part of. He was Billy and the Bale Jumpers, I think. And he hadn't done commercials before that. And all these guys who worked with my brother, studio musicians, they said, Tommy, you should be doing voiceover work. Well, shortly after that, he started doing beer commercials and things like that. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to make that film.
Was there a lot of challenges in terms of having the more, restricted location, inside the interiors of the battleship?
No, we built what we needed to build, and we had the real thing for the scope and scale of some of it. And then I'm sure today we would be different, but we were able to let the ocean sort of be out there. It wasn't, and we did shoot some real USS Missouri stuff with the waves and the dolphins jumping off that James Cameron wanted to use for Titanic. He wanted to use those shots of the dolphins. But no, there was a submarine there we were able to use, and we built the submarine, the Korean submarine that pulls up alongside the Missouri. We built that. Tug and plastic.
Well, you're looking at sort of the package. There's definitely some stunts in that film, but Under Siege has some fantastic stunt work in that film, and just action set pieces is aplenty. What's some of your favorite sort of action sequences you put together for Under Siege? Like, what's your top one, your favorite shot?
I haven't looked at that in a while. Let's see. Favorite action sequences. Well, why don't you tell me a couple that you remember, and I'll respond to that. I know that when Tommy gets blown back from the big 16-inch gun going off, and he just slides across the deck of the ship. I like that.
I did not see that coming in the film, by the way. I did not think he would go flying across the screen. It was great stuff.
Yeah. I just like the mechanics of seeing these missiles being loaded onto the submarine, and the night shots, swimming around with the guys in the water, the SEALs in the water, swimming around the boat. That was a lot of fun, and I would say probably the shock of the takeover of the mess hall.
Yeah,
when they take over the ship, the mechanics of the cutting back and forth, all the different places on the ship, and where these caterers and these mercenaries have taken over. That was pretty interesting. I also like the sequence around the big table, at the end, where you have all of these characters talking about what's going on. They didn't want me to build that. They said, well, just, have an office. I said, no, you got to have this big room with all of this power, and some of the guys in that sequence were actually real scary characters.
The knife fight between Tommy Lee Jones and Seagal is also incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Well, that came out of Steven's, background, and Tommy was game. He was very, very. I remember him saying, "This guy's strong." Seagal was strong, and he would hurt a lot of people. Seagal wouldn't pull punches enough sometimes. Yeah.
And I think I'd be remiss if we didn't dive a little bit into The Fugitive, which is definitely my introduction to you. I think easily one of the best films of the 90s, without shadow of a doubt. The one question I had, and it's interesting because I watched it again the other day to refresh my memory on the film. What do you think is the sort of secret sauce that makes that film still stand up now? It's easily one of the best sort of action films of all time.
I don't think people look at it as an action film per se. I mean, it has a lot of action elements and chases and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But I think, you get very invested in Harrison's character. Mm-hmm. I remember when we showed the film to the studio and to Harrison the first time. Tommy and Harry, they didn't think this film was going to be much. They had no idea that it was going to be so successful. They didn't know what we were doing, because I was the only one who sort of was putting all these little pieces together and improvising, and they didn't quite, they don't have a lot of screen time together. So, anyway, Harrison that after he breaks down in the interrogation and he's crying and the camera moves in on his face, he leaned over and gave me a kiss, because he realized before Tommy even got on the screen how invested you were going to be in this character. He got you by the heart, and so that's why I think the film is so successful. You have great empathy for this guy. Plus, Tommy is such a cold, calculating guy who develops this warmth and the empathy and logic for this guy can't be guilty. It doesn't make any sense. So you're cheering for the bad guy to become the decent guy. And besides that, the cutting and the music score are really critical to that movie. James Newton Howard did a great job at that. And I think that was the second time, because he did the package too. It was the first time James did a score like that, was the package. And you can listen to the package and listen to Fugitive. There's a lot of connections there. He also did A Perfect Murder later after that. But why is it still so successful? I think it has to do with its rhythm. It doesn't slow down. You have to work to follow what's going on. There's very interesting members of the cast, that you followed. I think that you like hanging out with Tommy and all those marshals, Joey Pants, and all the people around him. You're playing off of him. So.
Well, that seems to be, just because I'm doing sort of a deep dive in your filmography recently, like a theme going through your work, especially with the package as well. Like you care about both characters, you understand both sort of looks at the world, their perspectives, and it builds throughout. The tension builds until the end, and I think that's a marvel that you've put to screen. And it feels like you were perfecting the recipe until you got to The Fugitive, where, I mean, clearly everyone loves that film. It won many awards. And I tip my hat to you. I think it's a fantastic film.
Well, thank you guys, appreciate it.
I am curious, you've never made a sequel to your work, but there were sequels to The Fugitive and also Under Siege. Did you ever consider it, or was it immediately like, no, I've told that story?
I think what's interesting, the sequel to The Fugitive wasn't really a sequel. It was called U.S. Marshals.
Yeah.
And I was the same producer was producing that and producing A Perfect Murder.
Right.
So I had found the script at Warner's, and I said, why don't we do that? So I was busy we literally had dinner together one night with Robert Downey Jr. and Joey Pants and Tommy, and we were with Michael Douglas, and we were working together in New York at the same time. So I haven't really had, and I didn't want to do any Under Siege sequel with Seagal on a train. That was not of interest to me.
Okay, well, just to wrap us up, I have a couple of questions from Twitter, and then a question we ask everyone who comes on the show. One of the ones I had was from Clark76 Gav, who asks, basically, Tommy Lee Jones being in The Fugitive and sort of in 3 of your films, is that you casting him in the subsequent 2 films, or did he, go to auditions and pitch for the roles?
Oh, no. After we did the package together, which he didn't audition for, he just was offered the part. I definitely wanted to use him again and again. I said, would love to do another film with him. So, so that was just, you develop a relationship with an actor, and you want to continue that. I mean, certain Scorsese's done that with De Niro and other people, and it's interesting because when I see the package, there are a group of actors that they're from Chicago that carry through in so many of those films that we did there, and becomes an ensemble almost. When I get to Chicago, I can get together with 8 or 10 different actors who've all been in the same different movies together with me, which is really nice. Good.
Was that the Pam Grier connection as well? Because she's in a couple.
Pam and I worked together when I was a young cameraman, and we were doing black action remakes of MGM pictures. She was fantastic back then. And then years later, I put her in The Package and Above the Law. She's great in both.
Yeah.
She's really good at Above the Law.
No doubt about it. She's fantastic. And the other question I had from Twitter was from Space Odds 1985, and he asks, was the shooting of The Fugitive pressured, or were the production stories exaggerated?
The production stories?
Apparently, online people were saying it was quite a pressured set, and the production was quite pressured. Was that true? People talk about that online.
I mean, was it pressured? We were doing a lot. We were accomplishing a lot. We were shooting in the winter. We didn't have a script that was locked down. We were improvising. So I don't, I worked my butt off, but it was great.
Mm-hmm.
Great. We were accomplishing a lot and things were looking good. And that was the best thing for me.
Well, before we wrap up, a couple of questions left. One I always like to ask is there a film in your filmography that you feel didn't get the love it deserves, and we can point people to go and check it out?
I do, but it's hard to find because it's hard to get. Steel Big, Steel Little was the film I did after The Fugitive with Andy Garcia and Alan Arkin. So if you go to AndrewDavisFilms.com, you can watch it. AndrewDavisFilms.com has Stony Island on it, and it has Steel Big, Steel Little, and my documentary about the two great Italian photographers, the Mentor documentary. And Steel Big, Steel Little, they said, why is the guy doing The Fugitive doing these kind of, Frank Capra movies, right? And it was based upon a documentary I had done about a land fraud case in West Virginia and adapted it to Santa Barbara. But it's a wonderful, heartfelt movie, and I think it's very relevant, especially for the Latin community, because it deals with Andy playing two brothers, and Alan Arkin's great. I think it's one of Alan Arkin's best performances. So it looks really great. It's all beautiful, shot in Santa Barbara. So see Steel Big, Steel Little, AndrewDavisFilms.com.
Perfect.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes below, everyone, so you can click down there and check that out.
All right, great. Yeah, and then Stony Island. Stony Island is another one. My first film, which there's the making of Stony Island you can watch for free with Chuck D and Quincy Jones talking. It's a documentary, a 30-minute documentary about how we made that movie, which is really cool. It's about a white kid growing up in a black neighborhood, putting an R&B band together, based on the true life of my brother, who's a great musician today. And then the Mentor documentary, which we did a couple years ago, is about these two fantastic Italian photographers who had an amazing relationship to each other, helping each other through the years, who shot the most famous pictures in the world, with Sophia Loren and world leaders and all kinds of stuff. So very, very worthwhile.
Well, final question, Andrew, before we let you go. And everyone who's been on the show has been asked this question. It's very important. Now, we tackle spy movies every week, and we need to know, Andrew, what is your favorite spy movie of all time?
Wow.
It's a loaded question. It always is.
I don't know if you could call it a spy movie.
Okay.
Go on.
But it certainly has a fabric of all of the themes that we're talking about, the nukes and package, and that would probably be Strangelove.
Right, yeah.
No, we count that. Excellent film.
Behind the scenes, it's a classic, and Peter's, that movie captured a kind of wonderful darkness and reality at the same time, with a wink, 3 Days of the Condor, another one.
Another Christmas movie.
Yeah, another Christmas movie. Yeah. Those are two great ones. Conspiracy movies, spy movies. Wow. Well, Battle of Algiers.
Wow, that's a new one. Yeah, okay.
Because you get people observing and looking and checking on each other, and
Three great picks there. Now, you mentioned you're working on a book. Is there anything you can tell us about that before you go?
Yes, it's we just finished writing a novel, and I hope to make it into a movie someday. It's called Disturbing the Bones, and it's set against an archaeological dig in southern Illinois, where a young archaeologist discovers the remains of somebody who was murdered years before. And it turns out it's a black cop from Chicago who has to come down and investigate what happened to his mother. But what's really going on is the reason that she's doing this archaeological dig is because they're building a road to a new military site. And the military site is what monitors all of the Russian missile testing. So anyway, there's a terrible accident that takes place. And what you find out is that they were digging in the ground to find the case of a murder. They discover a conspiracy to end a peace conference. Somebody has their own missile in Southern Illinois.
Well, if there's ever a man that's going to do a conspiracy story, it would be you, to be fair.
This is the conspiracy stories of conspiracy stories. So that's what's going on.
Perfect. Well, Andrew, I want to thank you sincerely for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you both. Appreciate the work you did looking into this character here. And let me know when I can watch it.
For sure.
Will do. Thank you, Andrew.
Bye-bye.
There you go, folks. What a way to top off our Christmas celebration with a chat with Mr. Andrew Davis. Cam, how was that for you?
This was a real genuine thrill for me because when I was, really getting into movies in the early 90s, Andrew Davis was one of the first directors I really knew the name of. And I knew that it meant quality because of Under Siege and The Fugitive. So it meant that I was going to see really well done action. And so to be able to talk to him about a movie that I didn't know existed at the time, we caught up with the package many years later, but to be able to talk to him about that film and then those formative movies of my, younger years was just, this is kind of why these interviews are so much fun sometimes for me.
Yeah, this is absolutely why we do this. I mean, not only does it give an opportunity to sort of learn the behind the scenes of some of the films that we tackle, which is, a very interesting and important insight, because a lot of the stories that we hear in these interviews are not on Wikipedia. They're not out there. I mean, there's not even a commentary track for this film on its digital releases. This is as close to a director's commentary of the package that you're ever going to get.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
But yeah, and of course, The Fugitive, Under Siege, all good films to talk about. But I was very fascinated to learn about the package because, like I mentioned, Wikipedia, you look up the film, there's barely any trivia, there's barely any behind-the-scenes information. I had no idea that Gene Hackman was cast before Andrew was even brought on board. That was a revelation.
Yeah, that one genuinely surprised me because when you go through, Andrew Davis's work, there's so many stoic, kind of hard-edged leading men in his movies, whether it's, Seagal, whether it's Tommy Lee Jones, Chuck Norris, Kevin Costner. There's a certain type that are typically, the leads of his movies. And I would have assumed that Gene Hackman would just be part of that sort of personality that he's maybe drawn to as a leading man. But it was, a real surprise for me as well to find out that no, Gene Hackman was already signed and sealed, and that it wasn't a case of Andrew Davis, picking him out to star in the movie.
But we spoke about it in the review. I think the use of Gene Hackman was fairly genius in this film. I mean, does it make sense that there was a 50-year-old sergeant in the army? Maybe not. But the gravitas that Gene Hackman brings to a performance, especially around this sort of period of his career, late 80s, early 90s, is exactly what this film needed. I don't think having a little 20-year-old running around doing it, or Bruce Willis, Die Hard, sort of around the same sort of time, I guess mid-30s, I don't think it would have worked as well because you needed to have that sort of seasoned vet going up against the system. He's seen it. He's seen how it's all falling apart. And I think that's what really works with this.
Yeah, and it's something we didn't talk about in the review episode, which is that, while, as you say, maybe he's a little old to be doing some of the stuff he does in this movie in terms of a character, at the same time, there's an experience and sort of a wisdom to that character that makes the movie more suspenseful, I think, because that's there. It's someone who's very smart, which is a common theme throughout Davis's work of very smart, protagonists and antagonists.
I think, and also, moving on from Gene Hackman, it's also interesting to hear about sort of the beginning of the relationship with Tommy Lee Jones, a relationship that would extend into 2 more films, arguably Davis's 2 most successful films as well.
Yeah, and he, won an Oscar. Tommy Lee Jones won an Oscar for The Fugitive. So, that, 3-movie relationship really culminated in a big celebration, I guess, at the end for Tommy Lee.
And I think we mentioned this too, Andrew, in the interview, but one thing that stood out to me just sort of looking at his career is it really did feel like it was building momentum and to the point of The Fugitive. He was perfecting that recipe. I said about the sort of secret sauce, the word I use, so I'll just use recipe to stay in sort of food analogies. But, the sort of man on the run up against it, The Fugitive, as it were. And it's interesting seeing sort of the beginnings of that in the package and something that would go on to be perfected, in a different story in its own way. But there are a lot of similarities between the package and the Fugitive.
Yeah, well, you can definitely see that he's a director who's learning from each project and bringing those strengths, those increasing strengths, into the next movie, and they really pay off in that way. And you just notice how efficient he is as an action director. He was very modest in the interview, when we asked him about just his skill at staging action, and that was something that, like, even at the time, people really recognized that Andrew Davis was superior to many of the other directors working in Hollywood. And he's someone who I consider, in the likes of, say, like a John McTiernan, some of these really great action masters of their time. And it's an art that I do think has been somewhat lost. There are fantastic action people out there now, whether it's, the John Wick guys, but like at a studio level, the people making these big studio star-driven vehicles, staging action like in The Package or The Fugitive or Under Siege, that's a rarity that you just don't see as much nowadays. And there's a lot of, rapid fire editing or shaky cam or whatever you want to call it, various techniques to try to create this sort of chaotic action. But, you go back to kind of that more old school style, and like Davis is one of the best. And I do think it's a lost art to some degree.
Yeah, and we were up against it with time with Andrew. He had a very busy day, so we had about 45 minutes with him. And I know you guys sent a lot of questions in. I thank you for your questions. I tried to work as many as I could in sort of the general conversation. But there was one question from Space Oz 1985 who just wanted to know about Andrew's thoughts on sort of the current state of cinema. And that's and I kind of wanted to ask that question too, but it's such an open question. And I know you kind of briefly brought it up to him, and he was very sort of forgiving of some of the films that are out here now. But I bet someone of the caliber of his style of directing and the action that he's put forward would look at some of the other action films that are out now and just think, like, what have they done?
Yeah.
But I'm not going to put words in the guy's mouth. The other thing I think was quite interesting to talk about was, you brought up this point, Cam, was just how well Andrew does his villains.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Again, it's another sort of through line through his films, having these really great, larger than life villains, but they have a believability to them all at the same time. Even the sort of insane characters like Tommy Lee Jones in Under Siege, he's out there, man. He's pretty far out, but
Yep.
you understand his motivation, and you almost could, in a way, put yourself in those shoes. Not necessarily to blow up the world, but you know what I mean.
Well, and they all seem very intelligent. Tommy Lee Jones in The Package seems like an incredibly crafty, experienced character. Someone who is able to elude, Gene Hackman and authorities throughout the course of the movie. And that's something that I think really works through a lot of his action films and a lot of his movies as a whole, is that he never plays his leads or his villains as kind of like one-dimensional. There's an intelligence to them that just amps up the tension that extra bit more.
Absolutely. And before we wrap it up, just looking at his spy movie choices, we got a complete new one. I think we've had 3 Days of the Condor before. Excellent choice. It's on the knock list. Doctor Strangelove is definitely on our master film list. Is that the first time anyone's mentioned it as their favorite?
I believe so, because it has a lot of espionage elements.
Oh yeah. It's definitely one for us.
It's one. It definitely belongs. It's one that, like, maybe doesn't jump to people's minds initially as a spy movie. So we haven't heard that one mentioned. Also, Battle of Algiers has never been mentioned by someone when we've inquired about their favorite spy movies. So I am always very excited when films pop up that we haven't heard before. That's always exciting.
And you just think, like, you look at directors out there, they're studying film. It's their trade. I mean, there's a reason why Quentin Tarantino included a song from The Fastest Guitar Alive in one of his films. He studied film.
Yeah.
Someone else apart from us has seen The Fastest Guitar Alive.
Or you look at the car chase in The Package, and it's very clear that Andrew Davis is a fan of The French Connection.
Yep, absolutely. But there you go, folks. That was our chat with, one of the most influential directors of the 80s and 90s. I'm thrilled we had the chance to speak with him. I want to thank Andrew again, if you're listening. Thank you for your time. But Cam, I think we're doing something slightly special next week.
Yes, we have another SpyMaster interview that I think everyone is going to be very excited for. We are going to talk to Colin Salmon, who played Robinson in the Brosnan Bond era. I think this is going to be very, very cool.
Yeah, we started a bit of a trend last year when we spoke to Yvonne Zimmer about her time in The Long Kiss Goodnight. Basically, it's kind of the week between Christmas and New Year, so we won't be releasing a full review episode. We're going to get a massive SpyMaster interview and put it out there for you all to enjoy after you've eaten copious amounts of sweeties over the festive period. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to join us next week and check out our Colin Salmon interview. If you like what you heard on the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. And do not forget to follow us discreetly on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, listeners, on behalf of Cam and myself, we wish you a very Merry Christmas.